reassemble, and it is about 5 till 1. My understanding is that the state's next witness that everyone's agreeing to at this point to take out of order is present. So technical normalizers, I'm going to have you go ahead and step down, reminding you that you're still under oath. When the jury comes back in, after I check with them about their admonitions, I will explain to them that we're going out of order for this purpose. Okay?
I'm going to go now? Okay.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
And we're supposed to go get our jury.
Yes, Your Honor. Oh, I'm sure they are.
There's a collection of
Okay. Yep. If there are extra pens.
Well, they didn't look like ours, right?
Highlighters, those are mine.
No highlighters.
It's like I'm back in law school. I like highlighters.
Then you guys got to talk about those.
Circles everything. They're like,
You highlight all.
maybe I'll finish her. He's just watching you.
Hey, everybody, have a seat, please. Ladies and gentlemen, the jury, welcome back. As you know, first question right off the bat, any issues with the admonitions that need to come to my attention?
No.
Excellent. So happy to hear that. All right, we are going to resume the state's case in chief. We do have a witness that the parties have agreed to allow the state to call out of order. It is another physician, I believe, and because of scheduling, we will finish up the testimony of Detective Turner subsequent to us presenting this next witness. So don't want you to get too confused with all that. Miss Hiley, you doing this?
Yes.
All right, who's the next witness?
Dr. Kathy McElroy. Just stand right here and raise your right hand, please. Do you swear the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? I do. Okay, thank you. Seat, please. And watch your step, please.
Good afternoon, Doctor.
Good afternoon, Judge.
A couple of things. First of all, I just need to give you a general reminder, try to keep your voice as loud as possible for the jury. Second of all, you'll notice we do have media folks here. Do you have any objection to your likeness potentially being used on media?
Is it possible that it will not be used on media?
No, absolutely. If you object, any footage would only reflect from the stand down.
Okay, I would appreciate that. Thank you.
All right, very good.
Thank
Ms.
you, Your
Hiley,
Honor.
you may proceed when you are ready.
Would you state your name for the record, please?
Yes, it's Kathy Makaroff.
And would you spell your last name?
It's M-A-K-O-R-O-F-F.
You are a doctor
I am.
and hold a medical license.
I do, yes.
Where do you hold a medical license?
For the state of Ohio,
And how long have you held that medical license?
since 1997.
And what do you have to do to obtain, or what did you do to obtain your medical license? Maybe that's the better way to put it.
Sure. So to obtain a medical license, it's required to go and complete medical school. And then your medical license has to be applied for every 2 years in the state of Ohio. I believe it is 2 or 3 years. And you have to be a physician in good standing without sort of any complications. And then you have to complete continuing medical education. In the state of Ohio, it's 41 credits every 2 years.
And what was your educational background to become a doctor and obtain that license?
I did my undergraduate work at the University of Pennsylvania. I went to medical school at the University of Pittsburgh School of Medicine. Following medical school, I did a pediatric residency at Children's Hospital of Pittsburgh. Following that, I did a one-year child abuse fellowship, research fellowship, and that was at Cincinnati Children's Hospital.
And since then, it appears you've obtained an additional degree as well?
Yes, I also have my master's in medical education from the University of Cincinnati.
And how does that master's of, I think you said medical education, how does that assist in your profession?
Along with my clinical duties, I also perform research and I engage in teaching. That is just something that I wanted to basically be a better teacher. And so I did coursework through joint program through Cincinnati Children's and the University of Cincinnati to get a master's in education.
Do you hold any board certifications?
I'm board certified by the American Board of Pediatrics in the subboard of child abuse pediatrics.
What do you have to do to obtain that board certification?
The first subboard in child abuse pediatrics, we are the newest subspecialty in pediatrics. So the first subboard was offered in 2009. I was among the first group of physicians to obtain that certification. Then at that point you had to have practiced in the field for more than 10 years. You had to do child abuse work at least 50% of your time, and you needed to show scholarly work. So whether that was research or teaching, quality improvement projects, lecturing, you had to show that you had scholarly activity. And then finally you had to pass a board examination that was a written examination that had to be passed. Since to maintain your certification in a subboard, then every so many years they've now moved it. They sort of moved around the number of years, but you have to show that you do maintenance of certification. So that includes some scholarly work, that includes keeping abreast of the field, that involves quality improvement projects, and that involves, again, sort of taking a test to make sure that your knowledge stays up to date.
Do you have a separate board certification, or is it all combined regarding pediatrics in general?
I used to be board certified in pediatrics. That was my first certification in 1997, and then again I reboarded, I think it was 1997 and maybe 2004 I reboarded. Since then I didn't reboard in general pediatrics, I just reboarded in child abuse pediatrics, just because for the work that I do there was no reason to hold both.
And you talked about scholarly articles. What do you mean by a scholarly article?
Well, when I'm using that term scholarly articles, that could take, when I use that term in terms of what the American Board of Pediatrics wants you to show that you're being involved with that, or scholarly work, I should say, that could involve book chapters, that could involve peer-reviewed articles in journals, that could involve review articles, that can really be anything.
All right, and along that line, have you done any scholarly articles specific to child abuse and abusive head trauma?
Yes, I have.
Approximately how many?
I think I have around total articles, 20-something articles.
Where are you currently employed?
I'm employed at Cincinnati Children's Hospital.
And how long have you been employed there?
Since 1997.
And do you have a specific title at Cincinnati Children's Hospital?
Yes, I am. Well, my academic title is actually given through the University of Cincinnati College of Medicine, and I am currently associate professor of pediatrics.
And are you assigned to any specific portion or division of Cincinnati Children's Hospital?
Yes, I am in the Mayerson Center for Safe and Healthy Children, which is a division within Cincinnati Children's Hospital.
And how long have you been with the Mayerson Center?
I have been with the Mayerson Center since it became a division, and that was in 2001.
Can you explain to the ladies and gentlemen of the jury what the Mayerson Center for Safe and Healthy Children is?
Sure. So the Mayerson Center serves as the Children's Advocacy Center for Hamilton County, and that's just sort of an official term given. This is a designation from the National Children's Alliance to be a child advocacy center. And so that means we work with professionals from Hamilton County Children's Services or Jobs and Family Services and law enforcement jurisdictions within Hamilton County and the Hamilton County Prosecutor's Office to work cases of child abuse. But the Mayerson Center is also a medical division within Cincinnati Children's Hospital, and sort of with that hat on, we are what's sort of called the child abuse team within the hospital. And so that means any child with suspected physical abuse, sexual abuse, neglect, we will see as a medical consult. So just like any other consultative service within the hospital, pulmonology, cardiology, infectious diseases, we would see a child for a medical consult. In that realm, we also have an outpatient clinic. So if a patient needs to come to us, not admitted to the hospital, but just as an outpatient visit, we do that same type of consultative service as an outpatient. And so we see children from any county, any state will come to us, not just Hamilton County.
What type of medical professionals from within Cincinnati Children's are involved in this abuse team, as you described it?
Well, the Mayerson Center only, did you say medical professionals?
Yes.
Right. So the physicians involved in the Mayerson Center are only child abuse pediatricians or fellows in child abuse pediatrics, meaning that they're doing additional training. They're pediatricians doing 3 years of additional training to then become a child abuse pediatrician. But other other sort of professionals, I mean, I would include our forensic nurses and social workers as well within the Mayerson Center.
All right, and during the course of your duties with the Mayerson Center, do you actually see patients, come into contact with patients?
Yes.
And what are the different reasons for seeing patients?
Like I had just testified to, anyone can refer a patient to us, so it doesn't have to be another physician. It can be sort of any professional can refer, or family can refer a patient to us for suspected child abuse. So for some patients, we make the diagnosis of child abuse. For some patients, we don't make the diagnosis of child abuse. We make the diagnosis of an accidental injury or an infectious process, or something else that might be mimicking child abuse, or just a normal finding. And so we can. So really, sort of any type of patient, I guess, could be referred to us when there is a concern for child abuse.
Approximately how many patients does the Mayerson Center receive, I guess maybe not receive, I don't know if that's the right word, or see each year?
We see, I believe the number is about 1,500 to 2,000 patients. Now, not every patient who comes to the Mayerson Center gets a medical evaluation. Some receive just a forensic interview. So that number is all encompassing. But I would say for medical evaluation, we see maybe on average 4 to 6 patients every day. And then inpatient consults, we see, I've never added it up, but in the hundreds, I would say, every year. We see, 200, 300 patients probably every year as an inpatient consult.
Doctor, have you previously testified in a courtroom?
I have, yes.
And have you testified as an expert in the field of child abuse pediatrics?
I have, yes.
And in what courts has that occurred?
I have testified really in the tri-state area around Hamilton County. So, of course, Hamilton County, Butler County, Warren County, Claremont County, Brown County, Adams County, Clinton County, and then some of the more eastern counties in Indiana, and some of the more northern counties, Boone County, Kenton County, Campbell County, Gallatin County, and Kentucky.
Right. And prior to coming to court, did you provide the state with an updated curriculum vitae?
I did, yes.
And if I may approach the witness, the state's exhibit 69. Doctor, are you able to recognize that?
Yes, this looks to be is a fair and accurate representation of my curriculum vitae.
Move to admit state's exhibit 69.
Fence?
No objection.
State's exhibit 69 will be admitted.
Your Honor, at this time, it's the state's request that Dr. McElroth be qualified as an expert in the area of child abuse pediatrics.
Defense wish to voir dire?
Yeah.
She will be qualified as an expert in child abuse pediatrics. You may proceed.
Doctor, I'd like for you to describe for the jury how, when you get a referral for, and specifically a physical abuse patient, how do you go about an evaluation?
When I receive an inpatient consultation, I think you're asking for suspected physical abuse. The first thing that I will do is review any medical records that are available at that time. So we have an electronic medical record at Cincinnati Children's, which sometimes will also pull records from other hospitals if they are on the same system. And so I will review any medical records at that time. If the child has had any x-rays, CAT scans, MRIs, I will review those as well. On my computer, take a look, and then I will go down and review those images with our radiology physicians. And then at that point, I will go and evaluate the child. If there are caregivers with the child, if they're a guardian and I can allowed to speak with them, then I will obtain any history from them. If the child is old enough and can speak, history may also be obtained from the child. And then I will do a physical exam of the child, talk to any of the medical staff that it's appropriate to talk with. So, for example, if the child had surgery or if the child had a procedure, I will talk to those individuals. If whatever service that the child is on, so whatever group of physicians are taking care of the child, the primary team while the child's in the hospital, I will touch base with them. And then I will write up a consultation note, which goes into the electronic medical record.
And doctor, did you do so in the case of Hannah Weshy, date of birth 1/11/2015?
I did, yes.
And so I believe you testified that you not only review medical records, but in addition to the records, you actually look at images and things along those lines. Is that correct?
That's correct, yes.
And doctor, you talked about creating a note. Did you do so in this case?
I did, yes.
And did you also at some point prepare a follow-up report?
I'm sorry.
Did you at one point prepare a follow-up report specifically, I think dated December 14th of 2018?
Yeah, in the electronic medical record?
No, I'm sorry.
Okay.
Provided to the prosecutors.
Yes, so a letter. So I would call that a letter. I did author a letter, that is correct.
And in preparation for, in addition to the note that you prepared, within the medical records, when you saw the patient, and preparing that follow-up letter as you described it, and also in preparation for your testimony today, did you review all of the medical records involved in this case?
I did, yes.
I may approach with, let's start with State's Exhibit 4, has already been admitted.
Just make sure that it's the same stuff.
And 5 is also attached to that, thank you. State's Exhibit 8, consent children. State's Exhibit 91, pediatric records. State's Exhibit 39.
These are notes.
These are her notes.
We've not.
We have not done that one yet. There is a stipulation.
Oh, as to record custodian, yes.
Okay. If I may approach the witness.
You may.
I'm going to hand you what's been marked as State's Exhibits 39 and 40. And then also 8 and 4, Your Honor, for the record, those have previously been admitted.
Yes.
State's Exhibit 91.
May I give 69 back to you?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Please keep things straight.
Well, that's your CV.
Okay. And Your Honor, State's Exhibit 91 specifically, I believe there is a written stipulation regarding that, which is the pediatric records.
From the pediatrician?
Yes.
Yes, we've stipulated as to the admissibility of those prior to trial.
All right, Exhibit 91 will be admitted. We'll deal with the rest here momentarily.
All right. Doctor, State's Exhibit 39, do you recognize what that is? And did I hand it to you within the sleeve? You're welcome to pull it out of that plastic sleeve if you'd like to look at it.
Great, thank you. State's Exhibit 39 is a fair and accurate representation of the note, the consultation note that I authored on March 8th of 2018. Just to be clear, the way it prints out from the electronic medical record, it also has a progress note from a pediatric intensive care unit social worker on top of it.
And that's not part of your record.
But that is not part of my record, correct?
State's Exhibit 40, what is that?
State's Exhibit 40 looks to be a clear and accurate representation of the, what I would call the letter that I authored to you on December 14th of 2018.
Okay, and if you'd like to remove that from the sleeve as well, it's up to you if you need to. And State's Exhibit 4. And 5. Do you recognize those records?
So State's Exhibit 5, to start there, is a disc. And State's Exhibit 4 looked to be a fair and accurate representation of the emergency department visit from Kettering Health or Fort Hamilton Hughes Hospital on Hannah, dated March 8th, 2018.
And State's Exhibit 8.
State's Exhibit 8 is, I believe, the entire medical record, perhaps on disc, from Cincinnati. Or these are actually, I see, these are the photos and radiology records from Cincinnati Children's Hospital.
And there's 3 discs there, correct?
There are 3 discs. The radiology, I don't know what the middle one is, and then photos.
Okay. And Doctor, within Cincinnati Children's Hospital, how are the records maintained? Are they maintained in disc form or in another way?
They are maintained, medical records are maintained within our electronic medical record. When they are exported to an external party, I believe they are maintained then on disc form.
And holding a position within Cincinnati Children's Hospital, when you go to review medical records from Cincinnati Children's Hospital, how do you do that?
I would do it on the computer through our electronic medical record. So that's why my notes in the electronic medical record would stand alone. The way it's printed out from the disc, it's continuous. So that is why there is another note sort of on top of the first page where my note is.
All right. And so, Doctor, you stated that you came into contact with Hannah Wesche on March 8th of 2018?
That's correct, yes.
Can you tell us what time you came into contact with Hannah, if you're able to?
I don't recall, but based on, I know the time of her, based on the time of sort of medical evaluation, it would have been in the afternoon of March 8th.
And Doctor, could you walk us through the process of your evaluation, specifically as it went to Hannah Wesche?
Right. So I got the consultation on Hannah, and before I went to see her, I did have time to review her medical record, and that included her radiology record as well on my computer, and then I was able to go down and review her radiology films directly with the radiologist. At that point, then I went up to evaluate Hannah. One thing that was also available to me for Hannah were photographs that were taken of Hannah. So I also reviewed photographs that are also kept within the electronic medical record. And then I examined Hannah. There was no buddy available to talk with me about Hannah. So after reviewing with other physicians who were also caring for Hannah, I wrote my consultation note.
All right. And what was the time of your writing that consultation note?
It says the creation time was 23:37. And so that must be what time the note was started. And then the note was filed the following day at 13:17, so at 1:17 p.m., which means that is when I actually signed the note.
All right. And the times are logged in military time, is
Yes.
that correct? Yes. So 23:37 would be 11:37 p.m.?
Correct.
And Doctor, you made direct contact with Hannah Wesche.
That is correct.
And when you made contact with her, did you observe the injuries that were shown in the photographs that were part of the medical records?
I did, yes.
If I may approach the witness with State's Exhibits 41, 44, 46, and 50, which have already been admitted. And then 42, 43, 45, 47, 48, 49, 51, 52, 53, 54, and I don't think I have any out of here, so 55 then through 68.
All right, I'll do this. 47, 48, 49, 57, 51.
Essentially, it should be 41 through 68. Ultimately, some of them had been admitted. Yeah, so 41, 44, 46, and 50 have already been admitted.
All right, may I approach?
And you can actually, let's put them in order, I'm sorry. Doctor, I believe you testified, and I'm sorry, this is 41 through 68. I believe you testified that these are also part of the medical record?
Yes, they are.
All right, if you could go ahead and take a look at those exhibits. Doctor, are those true and accurate depictions of your observations of Hannah Wesche, as well as the true and accurate copies of the photographs that were made part of the Cincinnati Children's records?
Yes.
At this time, the state moves to admit state's exhibit. I think we have, again, 41 through 68, although a few of them have already been admitted.
Defense?
We don't have an objection.
All right, so 41 through 68 would be admitted. I do note some of those have previously been admitted. Looks like 44, 50, 46. I think that's all the ones I'm showing that have previously been admitted.
Thank you.
But all of them inclusive will be admitted. You may publish them if you wish.
All right. Doctor, in addition to there being photo documentation, do you further log your observations of Hannah?
I do, yes.
And you did so in this case?
I did so in this case, yes.
And where is that log of your observations?
Within the exam or examination portion of my consultation note.
All right. Ms. Wilson, do you know, are there multiple HDMI connections?
There should.
I'm going to give it another shot here. Let's see if it will take the VGA input. There you go. Okay. I'm not sure either. Okay. All right. Showing you what's been marked as State's Exhibit 41. Doctor, could you go ahead and describe your observations, and if you're, you can actually touch that screen and circle portions that you're talking about. And as you note the observations, if you could also explain their significance to you and your findings.
Okay, yes, I'd be happy to. And then hit the clear, where it says clear at the bottom.
Yes, and if it won't work for you, if you just let me know I can also do that. Yeah.
Sure, sure. There will be some closer photographs taken, but this photograph is showing Hannah's face and her upper part of her torso. So what you see going into her mouth is a breathing tube for her. She was unable to maintain her airway and breathe on her own, so that tube was actually placed at Fort Hamilton Hughes. In the back of her neck, you see that that is part of what we call a C-collar or cervical collar. That is the back of it. The front of it was removed for the photographs only. And there is somebody at the head of the bed who is holding her head still while that collar is being removed. So a couple of things that you can see on this photo that we'll see better is bruising to Hannah's left upper and lower. Sorry, I guess I have to push harder. Eyelid. We'll see that she has some bruising under her chin on both sides, and then bruising to her anterior top of her chest.
State's Exhibit 42.
And then this is just a close-up showing under Hannah's chin. We're really just seeing sort of the right side here, but there is bruising, and then this area here is an abrasion.
State's Exhibit 43.
This isn't a very good photograph, but we like to always put a measuring device in. Also when we're taking photographs, and so this measuring device is just placed into that same photograph.
Doctor, are you able to say, is that measuring device, is that measured in, looks like millimeters?
Yeah, well, it's centimeters. So each little line
okay.
is a millimeter, and then each bigger line, so it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 centimeters.
All right, thank you. State's Exhibit 44.
So you can see a little better close-up of both sides of under her chin and neck. You see bruising, again, the abrasion on her right side, no abrasion but bruising on her left side. So bruising on both sides and an abrasion on the right side.
State's Exhibit 45.
And then just a close-up of that left side.
State's Exhibit 46.
A close-up photo. It's a little bit out of focus, but showing, you can see a little bit more clearly the bruising on Hannah's upper eyelid and under her lower, under her eye as well. And then there is an abrasion to her left temple area.
47.
47 also shows that abrasion to her left temple area, but also showing her left ear. And bruising can be seen on the sort of top here or the pinna of her ear. Also within sort of the sort of big flap of the ear, and then also going into sort of going into her ear canal within here. There's bruising there as well.
State's Exhibit 48.
And this is hard to see what this is, but I know that this is the back of her ear, and it's just showing. I'm actually not going to call that bruising to the back of her ear. I think that's just some discoloration.
State's Exhibit 49.
This is showing the top or really the left side of Hannah's forehead, and showing that there is a bruise on the left side here, and you can sort of appreciate that that bruise is also associated with some swelling.
State's Exhibit 50.
So showing Hannah's chest, so she has round bruises at the top of her chest and also on the right side of her chest as well.
And State's Exhibit 51.
And again, just the same picture, just with a measuring device.
State's Exhibit 52.
This is Hannah's flank. So this is the left side of her flank. You can see her belly button up here, and this tube is going into her bladder. So this is her flank. Or her left side, showing bruising there.
53.
Same picture with a measuring device. Or I should say same view. It's not actually the same picture, but the same view with the measuring device. Correct.
State's Exhibit 54.
Hannah's left lower leg, it shows at least one bruise in the middle of her shin, and then an abrasion on her foot.
State's Exhibit 55.
This is the knee and the top of Hannah's left leg, showing two bruises to the inside of her knee area. So one here and one here.
State's Exhibit 56.
And the same view again, just with the top bruise that I pointed out with the measuring device.
State's Exhibit 57.
Just a close-up of that abrasion on Hannah's left foot.
State's Exhibit 58.
And this is Hannah's right knee, showing on the lateral or outside surface of her knee an abrasion and also a couple of bruises.
State's Exhibit 59.
Same view of that leg with a measuring device covering up part of that abrasion.
State's Exhibit 60.
And this is the other side of Hannah's flank, so the right side, and showing a single bruise, which is a little bit hard to see right there.
State's Exhibit 61.
This is the top. This is the top of Hannah's right arm, showing a bruise at the top by the shoulder.
State's Exhibit 62.
And this is showing more of her arm, and I don't see any injury in that photo.
State's Exhibit 63.
And then this is sort of the lateral or outside and sort of the bottom of Hannah's left forearm or lower part of the arm, showing some bruising. You can see that some of the bruising is obscured by this tape, which is holding her IV in place, so it wasn't removed to get more of that, to get more of the bruising into the photo.
Doctor, into relation, well, actually, if you could circle where the IV would be going into her arm.
The IV would be going in. It's interesting. She has two. So the IV is not going in down there. The IV is either going in up here. Because you see this, this is sort of sticky tape to keep the IV down. But I see that she also has sticky tape down here in her hand. It's doubtful that she has two IVs in the same area, although she could. But these are the two places where you would either put an IV in a child, because that's where veins are, so either in the top of the hand or in the inside of the elbow. So the IV is going one of two places there, not in the area where the bruise is.
State's Exhibit 64.
This is the top of Hannah's left shoulder. Now I do want to point out this sort of patch right here. That whoops. Okay, let me clear that.
You want me to clear it up?
Yeah. Okay. So this patch right here goes like that. That I'm outlining is probably a patch from a sticker that was put on her as part of medical intervention. So I am ignoring that, and I'm going to clear that. But this area right here is bruising.
State's Exhibit 65.
So Hannah's now being rolled over. This is her back side, and there are a few bruises here. So there's a bruise on her buttock right here. And there is an area of bruising up here as well. And then she has a bruise right here in her lower back area. And these two areas probably on either side probably represent dimples.
State's Exhibit 66.
Same view with the measuring device.
State's Exhibit 67.
So this is a view further up on Hannah's back, and you see this bruise again right here. This also, we see it a little bit better here, may also represent a bruise, and then in this view you can see up here on her back another bruise.
State's Exhibit 68.
Again, same view with a measuring device.
All right, doctor. You said you prepared a report and with your findings.
I did, yes.
Most significant to your findings, what photographs or exhibits there are most significant in your findings?
Right, so when these photographs were taken, Hannah was 3 years old, and a 3-year-old child can certainly have bruises in certain areas. So for example, the area on her left forehead would be an area that would be typical for a 3-year-old to have bruises. The shin bruising is another very typical area for toddlers such as Hannah to have bruising. The bruising around her knees is not as likely in those areas because one is sort of on the inside, one is on the outside. Those are usually more protected areas. But some children, depending on their activities, can get bruising sort of on the inside or outside. So those are bruises that I would say are very typical of a toddler child. The bruises that are very concerning to me are the bruises in areas where you do not expect children to have bruising from sort of normal play, normal daily activities. And I will point out also in a child who is medically healthy, and Hannah was medically healthy at this point, and also with no evidence of a bleeding disorder or a reason that she would bleed more easily or bruise more easily. So those were both true with Hannah. So the bruises that are concerning would be the bruising around her upper and lower eyelid, the bruising under her chin bilaterally, the bruising of her left ear, the bruising on her anterior chest, the bruising on her flanks, the bruising on her bilateral upper arms, the bruising on her buttock, and I don't think I said yet, the bruising on her flanks. Those would all be bruises that would be in a child like Hannah, to me, are very concerning for child abuse.
And doctor, specifically, I want to go through those ones that were the most concerning, and if you could explain the significance. So tell me what exhibit you're looking at.
Well, we could start with Exhibit 41.
Okay. It doesn't like me. I think it thinks I move too fast. Okay.
So
Exhibit 41.
Now that we've gone through these, and I think that everybody's had a chance to sort of see some of the bruises in more detail, I think this is a good place to see some of the bruises that I'm referencing. So, for example, you can see how Hannah's, like any typical child's, forehead sticks out. And so when a child falls, into something or off of something, their forehead's going to go first. So this is why the forehead is often bruised in a child Hannah's age, because with a typical fall or trip, they're going to injure their forehead. But you can see in this photograph how the eye is recessed in. And so yes, the eye can be injured accidentally, especially if the child falls into something that is sort of the shape, or size of sort of the eye socket, that the eye could be directly impacted. But if not, then the forehead is going to hit first, and the eye being recessed into the head is not. And the same is true. With under the chin, and so that is a very sort of protected area in a child falling. May injure the chin, but certainly wouldn't injure underneath the chin. And the same is true for the chest. So a child falling, the head sticks out more, and so the head is going to impact first, and the chest is going to be relatively spared, unless, of course, there's a history that the child does fall chest first into an object. Then that, in theory, could, in somebody Hannah's age, cause chest bruising. I think we can skip to State's Exhibit 47. And so this is her ear bruising. And yes, it is possible for a child of Hannah's age to fall on an object sort of sideways and impact the ear, because it does, it is sort of right there on the head. And when we do see this, we often see sort of a single small injury around the pinna of the ear up here. But I want to point out that yes, Hannah has an ear bruising, and yes, I just said that that can be accidental, but we see such extensive bruising in Hannah's ear, so within this area and also within this area, which is not expected from an accidental injury.
Doctor, before we move on, you said that's not expected from an accidental injury. Can you explain that?
Well, just if a child were to sort of impact something with the ear, you would expect, and we see that the outer part of the ear would impact first, and not the inner part, and certainly not the most inner part of the ear.
Thank you.
I think we can skip to State's Exhibit 53. And I don't know if we have to go over both sides, but both would be, so it would be State's Exhibit 53, and then gets towards the end, and then State's Exhibit, I don't know, there's another one that shows the other side. But again, flank bruising also very concerning for inflicted trauma or child abuse, just because it is a very protected area. And I do want to point out that Hannah has bruising on multiple planes of her body. So she has it on the front, she has it on one side, on the other side, on the back. And so one impact certainly couldn't cause all of that bruising on multiple planes of her body. It would have to be multiple impacts. And then finally, I think we can look at State's Exhibit 65, I believe is. Again, buttock bruising, yes, can happen if a child falls hard onto some object. We see a couple areas of buttock bruising, and especially this one seems to have some pattern to it, which would be unusual just for a fall onto something to cause a pattern like that. And then State's Exhibit 64. I'll just point out this one side. Again, sort of bruising to the upper arm would be hard for the child to sustain that bruise herself by falling on something or some other accidental mechanism.
Now, Doctor, you talked about actually prior to having contact with Hannah, you reviewed her medical records from Children's Hospital and anything else that would have been in your system at that point in time.
That's correct.
So
yes.
if you could explain to the jury what were the most significant findings or what you found significant in the records for your determination.
Well, I was able to review Hannah's pediatrician records, and really the most significant part of that is there was no significance. Hannah, there was nothing in her medical record that indicated that Hannah wasn't developing normally, that Hannah had any illness or Hannah had any exposure that would have predisposed her to having any injury or any finding that I was seeing on March 8th.
And so then the actual treatment records from both Fort Hamilton and Cincinnati Children's, was there anything in those records that was significant to you?
Yes, and so I don't know how you want to sort of approach this, but so first of all, there was a CAT scan obtained at Fort Hamilton Hughes, and then we were able to put that CAT scan into our system so we could actually see the images of their CAT scan. So there was significance of the CAT scan, which I can discuss, and there was also significance between the records at Fort Hamilton Hughes and also the the EMS, or Emergency Medical Services, records. So Hannah was first brought to Fort Hamilton Hughes by squad, and I was able to review those records. I think they were standalone as well as within Fort Hamilton Hughes records, which would be standard for an emergency department to incorporate the EMS records within their own as well.
And Doctor, you indicated that significant to you were the differences in the records, and I don't want to put words in your mouth. If you could explain what you mean by that, or what change in the records.
Oh no, I'm sorry.
Okay.
If I said that, I didn't mean to say that. I'm just saying. So I can testify about those things about those two entities. So both the EMS records and also the CAT scan. I'm happy to.
So those were part of what you reviewed, is what you're saying?
Correct, yes.
And thank you for clarifying that. So was there anything of note that you noted among those records?
Yes.
And what was that?
So if you'd like, I can talk about her CAT scan.
Yes.
So Hannah received a CAT scan at Fort Hamilton Hughes, and like I said, I was able to actually view that directly, view those images directly. And there were a couple of very significant findings. So Hannah, on CAT scan, had a large subdural hematoma or bleed. So what a subdural hematoma or bleed, or called a subdural bleed, is bleeding that is within the fibrous layers that surround the brain. So when I say subdural bleeding, it's not actually bleeding within the brain itself, but it's between two of the fibrous layers that kind of protect and surround the brain. So Hannah had a large bleed on the right side of her head. And it was, and the bleed was actually large enough that it was pushing part of her right side of her brain into the left side. So you could note that on CAT scan. There was no fracture to her skull. I did note that, but she did have some swelling between the skull and sort of the skin. So swelling not in the inside of the skull, but on the outside of the skull. And then the coloration of her brain was not completely the way it should be in a 3-year-old. So when I say coloration, that is how it looks on CAT scan. And so if anybody's ever seen a CAT scan, it's variations of gray and black and white. And we know that portions of the brain are supposed to look like sort of a normal gray or a normal darker gray or normal lighter gray in color. And when that color is off, that can sort of be clues to what's going on in the brain. So those were the most important findings that I found from her CAT scan.
And Doctor, you talked about there being, I believe you described it as subdural hemorrhage.
Yes.
Was there any other hemorrhage in the brain that was noted?
There were, like I said, possibly some subarachnoid hemorrhages as well that are seen in sort of a different layer. And then, I don't even know if it's on this CAT scan or another CAT scan, that there were actually bleeds within her brain that were noted as well.
Would it help you to review your notes? Would that help you to refresh your recollection regarding that?
Not my notes, but I would actually have, yes, actually I could review my notes because I do have the CAT scan in here.
And this is your medical record, your report with from within the medical records, correct? State's
Yes.
Exhibit, what's that number, so we're clear?
Oh, it is State's Exhibit 39.
All right.
Yes, I mean, there may have been more bleed in there, but my recollection was that there was the right subdural, some subarachnoid hemorrhage. Right, and then the swelling on the outside and no fracture.
And doctor, specifically, which CT time are you talking about?
I am talking about the one that was at Fort Hamilton Hughes. It is in the children's medical record at 9:55 a.m. on 3/8, but it was obtained a little bit earlier than that time at Fort Hamilton.
Because you described what subdural hemorrhage is and where that's located. What is subarachnoid and where is that?
Right, so you have 3 layers that surround the brain: the dura, the arachnoid, and the pia mater. The pia mater is adherent to the brain. The dura is closest to the skull. The arachnoid is in the middle. So subdural, under the dura, between the dura and the arachnoid. Subarachnoid, under the arachnoid, between that and the pia mater. And the way that you can tell the difference of these is that the subarachnoid will sort of follow the contours of the brain. I think most people are familiar how a brain, it has sort of valleys and mountains to it, so our subarachnoid can sort of follow those a little bit more, and that's how you can, because these are millimeter, like sub-millimeter in width layers, and so you can imagine it would be hard to tell on CAT scan, but that's how you can tell the difference.
Were there other things within Hannah's medical records when you reviewed them on March 8th that were significant to you for your findings?
Yes, and so the other thing that was significant to me is in reviewing her presentation when the squad arrived to Hannah and their documentation throughout her squad ride, and then when she got to Fort Hamilton Hughes. And so one of the things that I noticed was her vital signs, so our heart rate, our breathing, our blood pressure, and you saw a pretty rapid decline in her vital signs. And so, for example, her heart rate dropped the first time they measured it, and the second time they measured it, about 14 minutes difference. Her heart rate went from the 100 and I think it was like 120s, which is a little bit high for a child, but okay, down into I think the 70s the next time, and then when she got to Fort Hamilton Hughes, even into the 50s or 60s, which is a child's heart rate should be 100, 120, so very low. So we saw sort of a rapid sort of progression in that decline. And then the other thing noted by the squad was just sort of her sort of how they described Hannah. And so at first they sort of described her as making some sounds. She had been crying. They note that she had tears on her face, so presumably crying. And then in transport to Fort Hamilton Hughes, she was no longer doing some of these things. And then finally, one of the things we always check is pupils. And so the reactivity of the pupils, or the black part of the eyes that get bigger and smaller. And the reason we check pupil size and reactivity is that can be sort of a sign of what the brain, how the brain is doing. And she went from sort of a sluggish reaction, which is not normal, but then to no reaction of one of her pupils. And the pupil size was sort of no longer normal as well, or normally reacting as well. And we do know that that goes along with what was seen on CAT scan, that the subdural blood pushing part of her brain to the other side and sort of impeding on the other half of the brain. That goes along with what her pupils were doing. And so what was important to me was, yes, of course, those findings, but also the progression from when the squad got there to within the squad and when they got to Fort Hamilton Hughes.
Doctor, in your review of the records, did you determine whether or not Hannah had undergone any procedures while at Cincinnati Children's Hospital?
Yes, so before I saw Hannah, she did go to the operating room at Cincinnati Children's, and she had a procedure to remove the bleeding that was on her head since it was pushing on her brain to the other side. And so in that procedure, the part of the skull is taken off, the blood is evacuated out of the brain, and then usually the skull is not put back on at that time, but the skin is closed over top, and the skull is preserved. And so Hannah underwent that emergently when she got to Cincinnati Children's. Once she was in the intensive care unit and stabilized, I was able to see her.
And State's Exhibit 41, if I can get that back up here. State's Exhibit 41, would that have been an image following the procedure that you described?
Yes.
And where would that procedure?
Well, no, actually, I don't think so. I think this is probably in the emergency department and before. This happened because her head is not wrapped up.
All right.
I guess we can't guess, so to the extent that it's not probable, we'd ask that the answer be stricken.
Can you clarify the answer with the follow-ups, please?
I'll just move on to another question.
Very good.
Doctor, are you able to see, or do you know whether or not this was following the procedure? And I think your answer was?
Yes, yes. My wording was unfortunate. Yes, clearly there is no bandage that would have been present after a procedure. I do not see that bandage, so this would have been taken in the emergency department.
Doctor, before we move on to your findings related to Hannah Weshy that you initially noted in your report on March 8th, is there anything else of note that was specific or important to those findings?
Yes, so after I saw Hannah, she did receive an ophthalmology examination, and the ophthalmology examination was to look at the back of her eyes, at her retina, and specifically looking for blood or injury. Hannah was found to have retinal hemorrhages in both eyes, and what was significant to me was the degree of retinal hemorrhages that she had. So she had not a few, but she had many. She had hemorrhages in the 3 layers that we can see hemorrhages in, and she had hemorrhages that went from the back of the eye sort of all the way out to, if you can sort of think of the back of the eye, all the way out to the part of the eye that we can actually see on the outside, or the ora serrata is the Latin term for it, but it's basically all the way to sort of the edge of the retina.
And Doctor, I just want to go back and clarify. I specifically want to talk about your findings that you made on March 8th of 2018, and if you would like to refresh your recollection
Sure.
with that report. I believe the page number at the bottom for you would be 154 through 155. Doctor, at that point in time, had the I don't know if I can say this, ophthalmological exam?
Mm-hmm.
The ophthalmology exam, had that occurred on that point at March 8th?
It had not, no.
Right.
But I will just say it did at the time of my letter to you, but it not at the time of this authoring of my consult report.
Despite not having those results at that point in time, on March 8th of 2018, what were your findings?
So my findings, so based on my examination of Hannah, the review of the photographs, which were exactly in keeping with my examination, and reviewing the history that was provided to me, and reviewing her, at that point, CAT scans, 2 CAT scans, and reviewing her operative report as well. I did make a finding.
I may have just a moment to look at that. Doctor, you mentioned the history before we get to the finding. You mentioned the history. Where did that come from?
The history came from the medical record to me. And so, and the history also came from Cincinnati Children's Hospital social worker.
Doctor, is that a normal procedure for medical history to be obtained by a Cincinnati Children's Hospital social worker?
It is, yes.
And is that history something on which you and other medical professionals within Cincinnati Children's rely?
We do, yes.
And that history, anything within that history, strike that history, did it describe who the history was obtained from?
It was obtained by her father. It was obtained from her father.
And was there anything that in that history that impacted your ultimate findings on March 8th of 2018?
Yes.
And what was that?
Well, it was Dad's, so one piece was Dad's description of how Hannah was acting the night before, so on March 7th, in the morning of March 8th. I mean, not right, that's probably the crux of it.
All right. And so, Doctor, on March 8th of 2018, you made a specific finding, and what was that on March 8th, 2018?
My finding was, and I will actually read it if I can directly from my consultation note, and that is State's Exhibit 39. The diagnosis is definite child physical abuse, including abusive head injury.
All right. Doctor, you talked about you later had written a letter from December of 2018, and at that point in time, I think you had indicated you'd also reviewed the ophthalmology records.
Yes.
So in between that March 8th of 2018 date and that December 2018 date, was there additional information that you obtained and reviewed related to Hannah Wesche?
Yes. So 2 of the pieces that are included there would be an ophthalmology examination as well as the coroner's report. Hannah passed away on March 18th, 2018, and had an autopsy at the Hamilton County Coroner's Office.
And Doctor, I apologize because I was focused on bringing you back. Did you previously testify to what the significant findings were with the ophthalmology exam?
I did, yes.
All right, thank you. And Doctor, based on further review of the records that you received, based on your education, training, and experience, and to a reasonable degree of medical certainty, do you have an opinion as to whether or not the types of injuries and what caused Hannah's death was accidental or non-accidental?
Yes, I do, and the answer would be non-accidental injury.
And specifically within the pediatric world, is there a diagnosis that goes along with that non-accidental, or a term that is used?
Non-accidental trauma, yes, there is a diagnosis of child physical abuse that is given.
And doctor, are you familiar with the term abusive head trauma?
Yes.
And would abusive head trauma be involved in this?
Yes, so I also give the diagnosis, as I noted in my report, of abusive head trauma.
And that is to a reasonable degree of medical certainty?
Yes.
Would you explain what abusive head trauma is?
Abusive head trauma, I'd like to sort of go back and historically, although it's still used today, people will call it shaken baby syndrome. In 2009, I think the report from the American Academy of Pediatrics pointed out that abusive head trauma is just a better term to use. Shaking denotes a mechanism, and that mechanism does not always have to be shaking. Babies do, it's not, this diagnosis is not only given to babies, and it's not in the true definition of a syndrome at all. So that was just a term that was never a very good term, and so the American Academy of Pediatrics in a report suggested that abusive head trauma be a better term to give. And it is trauma to the brain that is abusive in nature. And so another way of thinking of it is it's not trauma that comes from an accident, it's not trauma that comes from an infectious process or some other medical process.
And so, doctor, with abusive head trauma, what types of injuries would constitute, or what type of mechanism would constitute abusive head trauma?
So that's kind of two different questions.
Thank you. Okay, so let's start with what types of injuries would constitute abusive head trauma.
Right, so there always has to be injury so to sort of give a strict definition of abusive head trauma, there has to be, I would say, injury to the brain, or I guess one could say injury to the head, so including the skull as well. And that's it. And sometimes in abusive head trauma, we only see injury to the brain. So that can take the form of subdural bleeding. That can take the form of actually injury to the brain matter itself. That can be subarachnoid bleeding. Less likely, we see something called an epidural bleed, which is instead of subdural under the dura, it's on top of the dura. Sometimes skull fracture is associated. It doesn't have to be. Sometimes retinal hemorrhages are seen. Usually in about 80% of cases, retinal hemorrhages are seen. So another way of thinking of it is 20% of cases of abusive head trauma don't have retinal hemorrhages. And children can have fractures to different parts of their bodies. They can have bruises or lacerations to their body. They can have oral injury. But some kids have nothing, none of those. Some kids just have injury to the brain, and the diagnosis is abusive head trauma.
So, doctor, what type of mechanisms are known to cause abusive head trauma?
Well, like the earlier term, shaken baby syndrome, shaking of a child certainly can cause it, but it can also be an impact to the head, or the head impacting something can cause these types of injuries as well. But it's severe enough impact or severe enough shaking is needed to cause these types of injuries.
So doctor, I know you indicated shaking baby, but then you later said you can shake a child. So can you actually shake a 3-year-old significantly enough to cause abusive head trauma?
Yes.
Doctor, does shaking explain all the injuries that you saw in Hannah?
Shaking
Object. Object.
I'm going to instruct you to disregard the last specific question. Ms. Hiley, you may continue according to our sidebar.
Doctor, that was a poorly worded question, so I want to, I think, address some additional information. Can you tell us whether or not the injuries that you saw could be a result of a simple fall or multiple falls that you would expect from a child?
So are we talking all of the injuries on Hannah that were known? Or at the time of my diagnosis on March 8th?
With everything known?
With everything known. And so now that I asked that question, I think your question was whether it was a simple fall or multiple falls?
Yes, whether the injuries that you saw, and I know you've already expressed that all of the external injuries that you saw couldn't be from one event. But in talking about the totality of the injuries that based your findings on which you based your findings of non-accidental trauma and would have resulted in Hannah's death, could those be the result of a single fall, a simple fall, multiple falls of a child?
No, and even taking that in part, no to a simple fall and no to multiple falls.
Doctor, are you able to say what type of force is required to cause that type of injury?
No, I can't say the type of force that's required to cause this type of injury. I think a question like that would deserve a very sort of scientific answer. And I think for obvious reasons we can't do the research to give us that answer. I also don't think in the complexity of a human that we can rely on mathematical models, on other types of physical models, or even on animal models. But I can, and I do in my everyday practice, rely on what we see. And so I do see children with certain types of falls, children who fall down steps, children who fall off of changing tables, children who fall in the arms of caregivers, and the types of injuries that they have. Hannah's injuries are so far greater and numerous than the types of injuries that we see from those types of falls, that I described, down steps, out of shopping carts, with caregivers. So that's how I can answer that question.
And doctor, taking out the external injuries that you noted within your initial March 8th report. Would a single impact to the back of the head be expected to produce all the injuries that you see and those that would have resulted in Hannah's death?
No.
And can you explain?
A household fall, or in a simple fall that you're talking about when you talk about single impact.
And if I wasn't clear, then yes, that is what I mean.
And no, just the degree of head injury, the degree of retinal hemorrhages that Hannah had, and the degree of head injury resulting in death, we would not see from a single impact to the back of a single impact from that type of fall to the back of her head. I think you told me to exclude bruising that we saw on her skin, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
And you talked about that couldn't be from a, I think you said, simple household fall. What type of fall? Is there a type of fall that could explain the injuries that resulted in Hannah's death that could be a single fall?
Well, I mean, the type of, the type of massive head injury and retinal hemorrhages that we would see certainly could come from a fall of a great height. And again, in my experience, when I do see children with falls out of even second-story windows, they do have head injury, but they don't have head injury even to this degree. Many of them do just very well. But again, with Hannah, when we talk about sort of a single impact, again, I will point out that there were not any skull fractures noted. So a significant fall, such as what I just described, you would expect to have, if not one, then multiple skull fractures.
Doctor, could shaking a child, and that alone, could that cause the types of injuries that you saw that ultimately resulted in Hannah's death?
Right, and again, not talking about the
bruising. Not talking about the external bruising.
But the head injury, yes, shaking alone could.
Doctor, based upon your education, training, and experience, and to a reasonable degree of medical certainty, would Hannah have been acting normally, walking, talking, asking for donuts after having received those injuries?
No, I would expect with the degree of injury that we saw, that we see in Hannah, and that the progression of how she was when she got to the squad and by the time she got to Fort Hamilton Hospital, that Hannah would start showing symptoms very soon after receiving that type of head injury, so I would not expect her to do those things that you described. I don't know if I remember all of them, but walking, talking, and asking for donuts, I believe, after receiving a head injury resulting in what was seen with Hannah.
If I may have just a moment.
Take your time.
I have nothing further at this time.
I do.
Unless you were going to suggest what I'm about to do.
I was.
Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, we've been going at it for approximately an hour and a half. I do expect Mr. Pagan to be thorough, and therefore I figured now would probably be a decent time for a 10-minute restroom break. We'll call this 2:30, be back outside about 2:40-ish. We'll start looking for you, and we'll proceed at that time to cross-examination. Doctor, you can figure we'll roam about as well, but remember you are under oath, and you cannot discuss your testimony with anyone. And ladies and gentlemen of the jury, please don't forget your admonition, okay?
Thank you.
Just gonna strike under water bottles.